Hi everyone, hopefully you can see my screen. Welcome to my webinar on using primary graded readers today. My name is Rebecca Adlard. I'm a teacher trainer, author, and I'm series editor for Colin's new primary graded readers series, the Peapod readers, which hopefully some of you have already seen. And today, I'd like to introduce you to some of the features of the Peapod readers and to talk about ways to maximise our use of readers to develop our young language skills in our young learners. So first of all, we'll recap why we use readers, how they can be helpful, how they can support our learners. Then talk a bit about how to choose a good reader or a series of readers, and I will reference again some of the features of the Peapods, how they've been created and developed, and then look at some practical ideas for working with readers. And excuse me if I cough or I sound a little bit croaky, as we say. Got a little bit of a cold, so apologies. So let's begin. Why use readers? What can they add to our young learners' learning journeys? Whether we're looking at teaching in the classroom or if you've still got some children unable to come into the classroom, I think it's true to say that readers are useful because they're engaging and they're stimulating. They provide a rich learning environment that's full of fun and energy and that changes focus for learners, which we know is really important. They're enjoyable. They mirror an activity that a child might choose to do in their free time. Children generally like stories, they like books, they're quite interested in the world around them, and therefore, by giving them readers, we're tapping into that intrinsic motivation. We're giving them a relatively enjoyable task, even if there's the added challenge of doing it in English. And readers are immersive. And by that, I mean it's almost learning by default, as our young learners almost forget they're learning when they become immersed in that story or the content of that book. And this is especially true, I think, as they progress up through the levels. So they're reading with confidence. Readers should be varied. So, excuse me, if you have a good series of readers, a good variety in terms of genres, topics, characters, storylines, and although your young learners might not enjoy every book they read, they should find some books that they do enjoy, that make them want to read more. And don't forget that I think it's actually great if they don't like some books they read. Being able to explain why you don't like a book is a really important skill in terms of developing that critical thinking that's really key for our young learners. Readers, of course, do support the learning that you're doing in your English language classrooms. They anchor the vocabulary and the language in meaningful and varied contexts, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But they're going to support all the classroom activities. And they will extend that learning by putting that vocabulary and that language that the young learners have studied in a new scenario. They can also provide that really positive view of English that's so important, because English can be a very tricky subject, as I'm sure you're all aware. You've probably all, most of you, learned English as a second, third additional language. And many young learners think, why do I have to learn this subject? And so this can expose them to that richness of the English language, to its rhythms, its sounds, in a nice and enjoyable, positive way. But also, readers can support across the wider school curriculum, so they can reflect topics that have been worked on in other subjects, such as perhaps sciences or arts, social sciences. And that can help to shore up what learners have previously studied in their own language, perhaps, but also, if learners recognise topics and concepts in the graded reader, then they're halfway to success in understanding the words on the page because they're coming already armed with this knowledge. So our weaker learners might find it's a really positive way into English by reading across curricula. So finding those graded readers that link to other areas of interest or knowledge. Readers can also practice multi-skills. So, I mean, reading, writing, speaking, listening, they're called readers, but that doesn't mean that they don't promote learning in all the skill areas. I mean, if you think about it, learners are likely to be practicing their listening, whether they're listening to you, perhaps a parent, or an audio version of the book while they read. So they're practicing their listening, and that in turn should be helping with their pronunciation. Yay! Equally, a book, excuse me, if you think of a book club, it should be talked about, it should be discussed, explored. So readers can provide lots of opportunities for speaking and communication. And then, of course, there's lots of scope for extension work, extension activities that could use all of the skills and can definitely include writing. So it's important to see readers as a multi-skill tool for us. And readers also, and maybe most importantly, especially at the moment with the year we've gone through, they help children to connect. They connect on one level by simply reading the same stories or books as each other, or with their parents, or with you as the teacher in their learning groups. They're connecting, hopefully, in an enjoyment, a sharing of a special time, reading a book together. But also these stories and these concepts can help them connect to the real world. And for many young learners, they've missed a lot of that this year. So this is really important. When they read a book, they're connecting to the real world. They're seeing, experiencing, connecting with characters, situations those characters are in, points of view. They're experiencing that character's journey through a story. They're seeing their reactions to problems, their negotiations, solutions, and also the fun they might be having. And that's really, really important to ground those children, bring in their connections to the world. So readers can reward a child's natural curiosity, their natural need to socialize, to explore the world around them. It gives them a perspective on the world that they ultimately need to be able to move and live in as they grow into global citizens. And then, of course, one big positive about readers is they can work really well in hybrid, mix of learning settings. They can be worked within the classroom, they can be worked with online, they can be worked with at home. They have a high element of autonomy. Learners can be asked to choose a book, to go away and read a book, and that could be a first reading or it could be a subsequent reading after you've read it in the class or discussed it in the class. They can take a reader virtually anywhere, read it wherever they like, when they like, as many times as they like, or listen to it. So this all adds up to teaching learners to be a bit more autonomous, taking little small steps towards that ultimate goal, and letting them have a say in directing their learning by making choices, giving opinions about the readers that they're engaging with. And then finally on this list, and there may be more things that you would like to add to this list, readers are challenging. They can stretch learners as they will provide longer and more complex texts than most course books can deliver. And that challenge, as I'm sure you know, is really important in a learning journey. So they can expose learners to maybe different cultures, different perspectives, different scenarios. And as we've mentioned, encountering problems in stories, encouraged to look for solutions. All of these, again, helping with those all-important critical thinking skills and challenging them to step up to an understanding and an appreciation of the reader. So if you want to develop learners' language skills, then we have to make the words and structures that we're teaching meaningful. And this basically means developing links in the brains between the words and their meanings and use. So if learners see new words and language in a sentence, or hear it in a conversation, or better still, read or hear it in a reader, then the brain creates a link and files it in its memory files. So it's basically a case of use it or lose it. And without that link being made, the language is just going to simply float away. It's not going to hold and stick. Okay, sorry. So how do we choose the right readers for our young English learners? Just a few points here. The first seems quite obvious, but they must be age and level appropriate. There's nothing more discouraging or demotivating than being faced with something that is far above you as a learner. So whilst they should be challenging, they should be doable, as I like to say. This is especially true if you've got learners working towards exams. In this case, you want readers that will reflect the word lists and the structures that your learners are required to know for that exam. And they should steadily increase learners' exposure to these, providing lots of practice, lots of opportunities to see those words and structures in different contexts. So you want a wide range of readers, and you want to think carefully about your class as a whole and individuals within your class. You may want to set up reading groups so that you can allocate a different set of readers to a different group. And readers, of course, give you that flexibility as well. We've talked about teaching autonomy, but they're very key in working with diversity within a classroom. So lots of flexibility to take into account different learning needs and speeds. Again, it seems very obvious, but the story and the content is really important when you're choosing readers. As I've said, in readers, we move away from the coursebook story. A coursebook story has a primary objective to present key words, vocabulary, or structures in context, and then to enable learners to notice the use and the form. And they do this with a lot of repetition. But readers obviously are using that language, but this is the story and the content that drives our purpose for reading. So that's why we read. We want to know what happens or what we can find out. So we want a good story or good content. We want good authors, good illustrations that really pull our young learners in and inspire them to read. Also, when you're choosing a reader, you really want something that presents quite natural language. Obviously, we want to stay within our level boundaries cognitively and linguistically, but equally, we do want learners to experience English used in a natural way. And by that, I mean, if you give this reader to a child in Georgia, a child in Egypt, a child in Spain, but also a child in England who's speaking English as a first language, then they shouldn't really notice the difference. It will seem as natural to any of those children in whichever is their first language, if they're all reading in English. And we want readers to speak to the child who is reading them. And by that, I mean a reader that engages them. So one way to get learners involved is to ask them to choose the readers they want to read, but equally it's okay for you to choose the ones you think they'd like or that are best for them. So look for readers that are going to appeal to your young learners. And I believe they need to be quite child-centered. And this is what our approach has been with the Peapod readers. So by that, I mean that characters and situations are ones that learners can recognize and relate to. So child-led scenarios, and they may see something in that character's personality or situation that actually resonates as the same or similar for themselves. And that's really important, being able to relate to those characters, just like they would to their favourite TV show, for example, that's full of characters that they see something in and they recognise. Again, it's about providing a stepping stone or opening a door into learning for them. So for some children, as I mentioned, it might be those familiar characters in the different books they read. So they'd prefer to have a set of books about the same character or characters that they get to know as they read more. And the minute they see the cover, they begin to activate their prior knowledge and understanding. And that means they're already interested, they're already engaged. They know who the characters are, where they live, what they like or don't like, their favourite things, maybe even what they're likely to do or say in a book, in a story. And that familiarity can be very comforting to many young learners, and that will provide a more comfortable reading experience for them. So here you can see we've got a set of books based on our siblings, Ivy and Mac, brother and sister, and we have them throughout the Peapod range. And so it means that children can start on a very low level, relatively young, engage with the characters, and then kind of follow them through and grow up with them and experience different things they experience. And for some young learners, that might really draw them in. Other children might enjoy a bit more variety in their reading. And so the way to choose books for them might be by topic. And those topics might link to interests or experiences you know they've got either individually or as a class. So, for example, you can see here two books. One is fiction, one is non-fiction, and they're both about growing vegetables. So if, for example, your learners have been studying plants, or they've been doing a little project growing seeds in school, or you have a school garden, for example, then perhaps something like this would be of interest to them. They can relate to it. And then you can move on to a different topic for the next book. And again, when you're choosing readers, the approach is really important. Will the reader engage your learners? Will it speak to them and encourage them to read? How are they being drawn into the book, into the story or the non-fiction content? And often this is about the first couple of pages. As adults, we find this, we pick up a book, we read a couple of pages, and then we go, do I want to keep reading? Or actually, should I just put that one back on the shelf? It's the same with readers for young learners. So open the first couple of pages. Are they engaging? Do they appeal to the class? Are they relatable? And you can ask your learners, open the book. Do you think this is a good book? What about this one? Let's try another. And you can do this with fiction or non-fiction. Our belief with the Peapod readers is that a non-fiction book should pose a question about the topic, a question that learners of this age, the age reading the book, will find interesting, intriguing, and it makes them want to read on to find the answer. So I think that's quite important, that any non-fiction book, you ask a question about that topic, and that will help learners to be interested and engaged. So also with readers, very important, especially when we're looking at developing the skills, to supply audio support. It's going to help them with pronunciation and their general comprehension and their general enjoyment of the story. It will help them to learn those the flow and the rhythms of the English language. And of course, it comes back to autonomous learning. It can promote that by giving them the opportunity to listen when they want to. And if you have reading time or a reading corner in your classroom, then, it's very nice to set that up with, maybe comfy things to sit on, maybe nice books and pictures around, but also, if you can, to be able to put in audio equipment, whether that's, a little computer in there or a CD player, whatever it is that works for you, so they can also listen in the reading corner. And it can also support learners if they're having to work at distance at home. It will support parents to help them set their children up with a reader if that's what you need to do at that point. So all the Peapod readers come with recorded audio, but if you're using readers that don't have that, I really recommend recording yourself reading the book aloud and then somehow make that available with your learners. Okay, excuse me, one sip of water. So, how as teachers can you make the most of every graded reader to really enhance your learners' language and their skills development? There are many ways to exploit a reader with before reading, after reading, and extension activities. I don't know how clearly you can see this, but this is one of our Peapod teaching guides, which is a very useful tool for both teachers and parents if children are needing to work from home. And it gives you ideas for activities for each of those stages, so before, after, and extension. Some of those activities may focus on the language, but some may be much more skills focused and have a more holistic approach to the book as a whole, and use it as a vehicle to aid and encourage communication through the medium of English. So let's look at some of the before reading ideas. I believe that before reading should activate a learner's schemata. And by that, I mean help them to think about the topic, to guess or predict what's likely to appear in the book. It should arouse interest in the book they're going to read. Personally, I like to often start with something that is aural, that involves children listening and working out what they're hearing. So even before they've seen the book, perhaps. And then they're going to think what this book I'm about to introduce to them might be about. So for example, here we've got a book called A Turtle Needs Help. And you might ask learners or you might play an audio clip of a beach, for example, and then ask learners to identify the setting and then to brainstorm things that they think might appear in the book using what they know about beaches. Gives you a chance to input some vocabulary if you know the key vocabulary you want to talk about. Also gives you a chance to see what they already know and what they're struggling with. Alternatively, instead of an audio clip, you could bring in a bag or a box with objects in it. For example, here you might have some sand, some shells, maybe some sunglasses, even a swimsuit, something that means beach. Have children put their hands in, feel for an object and try to work out what it is before they bring it out of the bag, and then you can discuss it. What is it for? So, do you have this? Where do you find this, etc. And then, of course, it's really important to move on and talk about the cover. When, as adults, we choose books, we often look at the cover first. We might look at the title, we might look at an image, and we're probably going to look at an author's name, and here maybe illustrators as well. So discuss that with them, discuss what they can see, what it makes them think of, if it appeals to them as a book. And then just ask them lots of questions. What can you see? What's happening? Depending on their level. In a non-fiction book, I think it's really important to ask, what do you know about the topic? And if you're asking a question, or, with the Peapod readers, our non-fiction titles are all questions, then ask them, can you answer the question? Do you know the answer? Because then we can read and we can check what you've said. So lots you can do with a cover. Excuse me one second. So here we've got the opening spread for that book, A Turtle Needs Help. And so before learners read the book with you, open the first spread and pre-teach some keywords or key characters, introduce some key characters from the book. You can write them out if they're not written out in the book you're using, so that learners begin to see those words, recognise them, and understand the sounds associated with them. And so here are some more activities to do with that first spread, that open spread. Obviously, you want to ask lots of questions about what they're looking at. Who can they see? What can they see? What's this colour? Can you see a etc. You could also play a chain game with what is on that page. So you start yourself and name something you can see in the picture, and then ask a learner on your left to name something else, and so on. Depending on the level, learners could repeat what's been said, build that chain. So in the picture, I can see a beach. Next student, I can see a beach and a tree. I can see a beach and a tree and the sea, and you can build up. You can also play guess the word. Describe something or someone on that first spread and ask learners to find the word or the name and to say it. You could have a little race, a little quiz, whatever works for your particular group of learners. You could ask learners to work individually or in pairs or groups to list the words on the page in alphabetical order. And that's a great way to just get in a bit of dictionary work, a bit of dictionary skills, as well as activating their schemata. You could, with higher level learners, ask them to race to find the items on the front that are labelled on that front spread inside the book. So that might be find a picture and tell me the page number, or it might be find the written word somewhere and tell me the page number, or read the sentence. You could make true or false statements about the pictures for learners to decide if they're true or false. For example, Alex's hair is red, false, Alex's hair is black. You could ask students themselves to make true or false questions for each other or for you. And ask learners to think of questions to ask you about the picture. What's this called? Can you see a do you know where this is in the world, in the country, whatever? And then I think really important, just ask them for their opinions and to compare what they're looking at with things they know. So first of all, do you like this picture? And then does it look the same or different to a beach in our country, or you know, somewhere you know? And just to see, you know, do we have turtles? Do we have big turtles, little turtles? Just to talk about it. And then, of course, an obvious one is prediction. What are we expecting to read in this story? What do we think these characters will do? What do we think is going to happen in this book? What information will we be told? And if possible, make a note of these predictions on a whiteboard or anywhere, and then you can come back to them after reading and say, well, what did happen? And then maybe also look at the picture dictionary or glossary if the book has one, and see if that can help your learners to predict the content of what's going to happen. So give them every chance to really be ready to read. Then once you open the actual beginning of the story or the non-fiction book, you could just do one other little activity to get learners thinking. So taking that first page, that first spread, cover all or some of the text or the speech bubbles, if you've got speech bubbles from characters, and ask learners to use the pictures, use the images to guess what's happening, or guess the information they're going to read on these pages, or what a character is thinking or saying, and to try and put that into English if they can. And then, of course, check, are they right? How is it different? So let's move on a little bit to after reading. We talked about the picture dictionary or glossary as a before reading tool, but of course it's also a really useful post reading tool if you've got one. So what can you do? Well, for each word, learners could do a word hunt in the book, And that can lead on to asking them to explain why each of these words or how each of these words is key or important in that book. So that's a really good review of comprehension. If you want to do, excuse me, more vocabulary-based activities, you could play bingo with them. And so you just have them cover with coins or bits of paper 3 or 4 words, you shout them out, they take off and uncover the words as they hear them. And then the first one to have uncovered all the words shouts bingo and is the winner. If you could also play whispers, so this will help with pronunciation and speaking. So you choose a word or a word in a sentence for higher levels, you whisper it to one student, they pass that whisper around the classroom until it comes to the end of the line, and then they say the word or the sentence, and you can see what's happened to it. Were they correct? How's it different from the beginning? And that's quite a fun little game, very good as a beginning of a lesson or a beginning of a reading activity or at the end. And you could also do a picture dictation with these words. You don't have to use all the words on that page, but as many as work. So for example, with this one, you might say, draw a beach, draw a turtle on the beach, draw 2 bottles in the sea, etc. And then they can compare what they've drawn. Other after reading activities. Well, how else can we utilize the content? You could take 3 or 4 images or pages from the book and describe one of them for learners to decide which one you're describing. So they have to choose. And you could use phrases or sentences that appear in the book, or you can just use your own, whatever suits your language, your level for your learners. So it also means you can then choose the language you want them to focus on. You can be very specific. You could put learners into groups and have them act out an image or a page from the book or a chapter perhaps. Other groups could guess which one they're acting out. Alternatively, the other groups could try to narrate the scene in English as they watch. So our one group just acts, mimes without words, and the other group has to put the words, the dialogue over the top. And that's quite a fun activity. You could focus on keywords from the reader and then get learners to devise a poem or a chant and then have them perform it to the rest of the class. This is a great one for independent work, for group work also. You can provide sentence stems, you could provide a writing frame, a bank of keywords, depending on learners' ability. And then, of course, don't forget those predictions that you asked learners to make when you were looking at the covers and the opening spreads of the book. Always validate what you've asked learners to invest, what you've asked them to do. So validate those predictions by returning to them here and saying, well, were we right? Did we get some bits right? Were we surprised? What was different? And then when you've got a non-fiction reader, focus back on that key question that the book posed or you posed or a learner posed, and ask, did we find out the answer? And where did we find out the answer? And in pairs or groups, have your learners construct that answer, to write it down, to say it, whatever. Alternatively, you could do it as a whole group on the board, or perhaps, you know, if you're online, you could do that in a chat box. And then what about asking pairs to actually role play a phone call with an alien or someone who doesn't speak English, and have that alien, that other person, ask that question from the book and have the child explain in English the answer and give as much detail, extra facts as possible. And with stronger or older learners, you could, of course, turn that into a writing task, a kind of letter or email exchange, asking and answering about the book. So lovely comprehension activities. And one of the best ways to absorb and memorize learning is through recounting or retelling. It's really important to young learners of primary ages. And when we give young learners stories, then we're giving them the opportunity to do this, to actively engage with the language, with the learning. With higher levels, we can put them into expert groups after they've read the stories or the books, and then give each group a different question about the content to discuss. And then once they've formed an answer, rearrange your groups into what we call sharing groups. So you take one from each expert group and make a new group, and that's their sharing group. And then they can discuss what the question they were asked was and what their answer, what they found out together, sharing their knowledge. Similarly, if you don't want to work with groups, then you can do it as a think, pair, share. So ask the question, have a child think on their own, talk with a partner, and then share as a group. And then, of course, your kinesthetic learners will really enjoy acting out a story or part of a story. Split the class into groups, have them each act out a chapter or a small part of a story. See if you can get the whole story acted out around the class. With stronger classes, older classes, introduce another element, add another character, add a twist or a turn in the events of the story, a what if. Ask them to produce extra dialogue or another scene, or change the ending. Play with it. Stories should be played with and retold and extended. And children are very good at this. They're generally very imaginative. And storytelling is a really important way to promote mental health and well-being, which comes back a little bit to what I was talking about earlier with connections, making connections with the world, and really understanding that children need, especially at the moment, a lot of time to process what they're seeing and feeling and to talk about it. So allowing children or giving them this space to talk about possibly upsetting or traumatic everyday events, such as starting school, for example, losing something, I don't know, trying to find a new friend, as well as more exciting or funny situations, is really important. And readers give us the chance to do this. All the Peapod readers have children as their central characters, as I was saying, and they're the protagonists, which means that the readers identify with them. And this can lead to lots of discussion around the themes and the events in each book. And that discussion is really important. So use lots of prompt questions, encourage conversation for every book. And we have ideas given in the plenary sections in those teacher guide notes that I showed you, but I'm sure that you can come up with lots of ideas, find those themes in every reader that you use. So active engagement. But let's come back to that idea of developing multi-skills as well. Here we've got an example from the Peapod readers of a listening and speaking practice based on an image from the reader. Now, this activity, which comes at the back of each of our books, aligns to the Cambridge Starters and Movers speaking exams. You can see there's a script that can be read aloud by you or by a parent if they're able to do that, although here it's also pre-recorded. And the script is just a series of questions which relate to that picture from the reader. So if you're using a reader that doesn't have this activity, you can make this up yourself. Choose a key image and write or record some questions. You want to draw on the knowledge of key vocabulary and structures from the reader, and learners then will listen to the questions and they should try to answer them out loud. That's the key. Obviously, learners won't necessarily be able or willing to respond every time or at the first try or to every question, and that's fine. But hopefully, the more readers they work with, the more practice they get, they will hopefully get into that rhythm of listening, understanding and responding. And, you know, those original one-word responses, yes, no, or even a physical gesture of will develop and become more extended verbal answers, which is what ultimately we're looking for when we talk about particularly movers exams. And activities like this also help some parents and carers to see the validity of using readers, that they're doing more than just being a nice little book for your child to read. So although we do want young learners to be reading for enjoyment, first and foremost, that is the key, it's also important that we see readers the tools to do so much more, and that we input and use them to their full advantage. This is an example of the same activity type, but it's from a slightly higher level. It's from one of our siblings' books, our Ivy and Mac books, at level 4. And if you can see those questions, you'll see that they're becoming more complex. They're more open, so they're requiring more of a response than just a yes, no. They need a more developed response, including possibly personal facts or opinions. So really now we're stepping up, really preparing them for the starter and movers speaking exams. I'd like to briefly come back to that idea of readers being that vehicle for connection, and that space where we read a book together and we share our ideas. And here we've called it plenary time. So as we've said, conversations about each reader are really important for consolidating and clarifying story and content, and also in validating the effort involved for our young learners to actually read a book all the way through in English. If they read a book and then it's well done, then there's almost a moment. So really giving them time and saying, this is important and you've done really well and we can talk about this. And, you know, you want to review that book, check comprehension just with some simple questions, what happened to a character, and you can move to more complex questions such as, how do you think he or she felt when this happened? Or why? Why did this happen? And then, where it's appropriate, for learners to relate events in a book back to their own lives and to make those extra connections. And of course, any plenary work that you do, if your learners can do it in English, it's providing extra practice for those all-important speaking exams, which many of your learners will probably be taking. However, I do also believe it's actually fine to talk about the books in their first language, if that's where your learners are. The most important thing is to encourage reflection and critical thinking. And if your learners feel too young to be able to engage with you, or for some reason they're not willing to engage with you in that conversation, there is still, I think, a usefulness in asking those questions. Even if you ask those questions, you leave a pause, a gap, and then you just give your own opinion, your own answer. They're still listening, they're still hopefully thinking, and, you know, hopefully over time, maybe they'll start to engage with that. And remember, this is your opportunity to include some of those personal, social and emotional health questions, which, you know, are so key. So readers can give us a way in to talk about some of the more sensitive issues and challenges that children face. So it's a very special opportunity. And you need to look for opportunities in every reader to explore some of these issues. And they might be things like how to be a good friend, how to deal with anger, or what makes us happy, sharing, whatever it might be, that you can find little moments to just use the reader as a way in to talk about that. And it's a very safe way in. And then look for opportunities within the readers to extend learning with fun extension activities. Here we've got just 3 that I've pulled out from various different Peapod readers. We've got a science experiment, we've got a mini project using photography, and we've got a creative writing task. All of these are based on the events within a book, so they relate to the events of that reader, but ask children to produce something of their own. And of course, if children aren't in the classroom with you, it's nice if you do the activity yourself, provide a model, whether that's a video or an image you share, and then ask them to do their own and share with you and the class. If they're in the classroom, you know, it could be a homework, it can be some group work, it can be, I don't know, independent time. And you could all have fun doing these tasks together. Make sure to give really positive feedback to all and any attempts, and to keep those tasks varied and to include lots of different skills in there. Talk about it, write something, listen to each other, read each other's work, whatever it might be. And so validate all the learning with whatever learners produce. Very, very important. So this feedback, obviously, I like this work, you've put in a lot of effort, you've tried really hard, and display. And that might be on a wall in your classroom or a reading corner. It could be in your school hall. It could be virtual, it could be work you've uploaded to a school website, whatever works for you and your teaching situation. And where you can, try and invite other classes, school staff members, school members, parents, carers to view the work, so that you can really celebrate what children are producing and really, again, give value to the fact that they're reading these readers. And that's the end of my presentation. I hope you found it useful and interesting and picked up some good ideas. If you have any comments for me, then please, you're welcome to get in touch by email. If you would like to know more about the Collins Peapod readers, then please do contact the English book team or Collins themselves. And thank you very much for your time. I don't know if there are any questions. Tiona.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca, for sharing your ideas. The webinar was really interesting and productive. Yeah, we have several questions. First one is, how much time should we spend on studying by readers in addition to the manuals or course books? For example, if we have 3 lessons per week, shall we use readers in 1 lesson only or more?
That's a very interesting question. And I think that probably depends a little bit on expectations. Sometimes I know parents' expectations are that you must get to the end of a course book, and therefore there's a bit of a race to get there, and there's not a lot of time for other things. Personally, I would love to see reading itself introduced in most lessons, even if that's 5 minutes when they pick up a book and read the next page. And quiet time, I think, is really important, really key. Equally, you might want to do one reading as a group and then ask them to take the book home, try and read it on their own or read at another time, and then come back to it and give a lesson dedicated to that reader where you do those lovely other activities, where you you know, do some of those extension activities, do the plenary with them, and dedicate an actual bulk of time to it at that point. Remember as well that if you're starting a new topic in your, you know, a new unit in your course book, then maybe you can find the right reader to introduce that, to work alongside that. So it's actually, you know, helping and extending that language, that content as you work. So a little bit here and there, 5 minutes, 10 minutes per lesson, maybe.
Thank you. So what type of readers would you recommend? I mean, fairy tales, small stories, or something else? Or I'll add, I'll combine questions here. Could you recommend us resources or books from which we could make readers for young learners?
Well, obviously, I'm going to recommend the Peapod readers, because I think children love fairy tales. I think you're right. And I think that's a very valid reading option for young learners. I have to say, I also believe, and this is what we've based and developed the Peapod readers on, is that children like to read about other children doing things, experience things that are close to their own ideas and experiences. So that's what we've tried to do, is we've tried to look at topics that first of all fit with starters and movers, word lists, structures and topics, and then to talk about children somehow experiencing, dealing with all of these topics and themes. And I think looking for books that have characters that are relatable is going to help your English language learners. If you want to make your own readers, then what I've seen that I love is classes where the teacher has taken the children themselves, asked them to talk about stories, taken photos of the children in various scenarios, and then put them together as a reader. I've done this myself for my own children growing up, and you make a little story out of whatever pictures you've got, and then you read that as a reader together in the class. So that's a lovely way if you want to create your own. And again, it's about putting them front and center, making them the protagonists of that story, asking them what they want to talk about, what they want to read about. You can make it funny, you can make it happy, you can make it solve a problem at school, whatever you want. And they're going to love that.
Okay, should we offer readers according to their ages?
Sorry, say that again, Tiona.
Should we offer readers according to their ages, to student ages?
Yeah, this is a really tricky one actually with young learners, because you've got a double thing going on, haven't you? One is age appropriate and one is language level appropriate. And sometimes those align really nicely, and sometimes that's not quite possible. So yes, I would say age appropriate is the most important thing, because there will be words in any reader that a child probably doesn't know. And that's okay if they've got the illustration to help them, if they've got you there to help them with some of those build-in activities, lead-in activities. So age, I think, is really important. I don't want to read a book for a 4-year-old, and a 4-year-old doesn't want to read a book for a 9-year-old. I think that's quite key.
Okay, and here we have requests. Can you please give us advice what kind of books can we use? And if you have some, can you please send us on our email. PDF version.
I mean, sorry, Tiona, is that a question regarding readers or about reading in general?
I think readers.
Have a look at
it's not specified.
Have a look at the Peapod readers and tell me what you think.
Okay, and so I sometimes start the lesson with reading a short story or an extract from a story to motivate students, but we have lack of short stories at school. Could you please send us PDF for kid stories? Again, we can just advise people, readers here.
Well, yes, I mean, to be honest, I'm sure there are other sort of short stories you can find somewhere online, but I couldn't recommend, I don't have that, I'm afraid. I don't know what I would recommend that's out there. If you're talking about for free, I mean, I'm not sure. You know, we write a lot of graded readers. Publishers do a very good job with graded readers, but obviously there is a cost involved there. But as I say, you know, do look at Peapod readers, because I think, you know, they're relatively short. They are really interactive, really nice for kids.
What kind of reading activities could you advise for the children with disabilities?
I think this will depend on the disability. I think a lot of, again, it's a big field, isn't it? Disabilities. Obviously, a lot of those children will appreciate the multi-skill element and multi-sensory element. So anything you can do to bring a reader to life, so that when they're hearing something, all those audio clips I talked about possibly will really enhance their understanding and engagement. Anything that is sensory, so I talked about that box or that bag of objects, Anything they can dress up in will often engage much more. Allowing them to act out, even something like, I'm at the beach, you know, do you want to be a seagull? We've got seagulls at the beach. Can we make the noises? Can we act that out? Things like this will often engage children who perhaps haven't got that level of concentration or awareness or engagement that others do, and will keep them in the activity rather than excluding them. I think obviously, depending on the disability, giving them just a reader to read may do nothing for them. So it's about bringing it to life. Even, you know, I've seen someone years ago with going on a bear hunt, as I'm sure you're all aware of Michael Rosen's Going on a Bear Hunt, creating a bear hunt through the entire classroom for a group of more challenged children. And they helped to create the environment. They created with, you know, different materials and different sounds and different sensory items. And then they did the bear hunt through the whole of the classroom, and they were chanting it, they were listening to it, they were moving through it, and it was amazing. Obviously, these things take work, but what I'm trying to say is bringing it to life. The more you can do that, the more you're going to include all of your range of children, whatever levels, disabilities, challenges they face.
Okay, thank you. And I've got several questions in direct messages. So how can we make online classes still fun and enjoyable when sometimes we have been teaching online?
Excuse me, it is tricky. One thing that I use a lot of is an online quiz site or app. For example, Kahoot. I don't know if you've seen that. Definitely very good if you want to use it after you've read a story to consolidate some of the key things that happened in that book or the key vocabulary. So it's a little quiz, it's interactive. Children can play either together against each other, so it's competitive, or if that's too much, they can play in their own time, and then you can display the results. So you see who wins, who's faster, who gets more right, and that's very nice. I use this from very young learners through to 18, 19, 20-year-olds. It works across the range, and you can use images and words. So that's very nice. Anything like that is a bit different, is more like a video game, something like that will work. The other thing that I would suggest you go and look at is Loom, L-O-O-M. It's a tool where you can record yourself reading a reader, and then you can record it on, for example, Zoom, and then you apply Loom on top of it, and it means you can play the video of you reading the reader, but you can see yourself in a little circle on top of that video. So you can stop and start the reading and say something. You've got a little pen, so you can highlight words in a book, images in a book, circle them. You can move yourself around so you appear in different places on that page, and it's a really interactive tool. And again, I've used it from primary up to, you know, a higher education level. And it really engages, keeps it fresh, keeps students guessing what's going to happen next. It's a really nice tool, so you could check that out as well.
And one more, so where can we purchase, buy these books? And I think I should answer this question. You can visit our bookshops in Tbilisi at Charles Avenue number 14, or in Didi-Romi, Extrausani Street number 92, or in Batumi. Our bookshop is in the building of St. Andrew's First Cold School. I think that's all. There's no more question. So thank you everyone for your time.